For the Americans, the Viet Cong would booby trap the trails and booby trap the jungles and all the roads. Punji traps were pits filled with sharp stakes, sometimes poison on the end of the stakes. Landmines, some of them would pop out of the ground and explode at hip level. I love this one here. This is a big piece of material with spikes hanging out of it. It would hang up in the trees, and the tripwire would go off, and the spike would come down and hit you chest level. Or this one where you'd fall in and you can see the spikes down at the bottom. Wire rig grenades would go off, as soon as you tripped them with your foot, a little fishing wire that you couldn't see. So for this war, a lot of our soldiers would go out like these soldiers at the bottom of the screen, looking every day, patrolling for the Viet Cong. Lots of soldiers never saw their enemy, but they could easily be killed or injured by the enemy by these booby traps that were set all over Vietnam. Still there. I mean, people die in Vietnam all the time from landmines that have been long forgotten. Yep. Next slide. The Americans used Agent Orange, which was an invention for this era. We had it a little bit during World War II. We would drop it over large areas of Vietnam. It killed all the plant life so the enemy could not hide. Later, it turned out that it caused cancer, severe health problems. We also used napalm. And we also had napalm we used it extensively during the second part of the World War II. Napalm is a jelly that is flammable. You light the jelly and it splatters and burns. It sticks to everything, including human beings. So it's a very nasty product of war. Next slide. The Tet Offensive is the biggest day of the war. It's a turning point in the war. In 1968, we had 500,000 soldiers fighting the war in Vietnam. 500,000. Tet is the Vietnamese New Year, where they usually didn't fight during holidays. But on this day, in 1968, 30 different targets were hit all over Vietnam by the Viet Cong. They didn't win any of those battles. They were beaten back at every single one of those 30 targets. But what's important about the Tet Offensive is that we thought they were an unorganized bunch of poor villagers living in the jungle off rice, when actually it was very organized. It was very well trained. They could communicate across the country, and that changed our opinion of the enemy and how this war might work. Lots of Americans after the Tet Offensive, both soldiers and civilians at home, were discouraged. This war is going to take forever. Some Americans wanted a tougher policy on Vietnam after the Tet Offensive, and a lot of Americans want us to get the heck out of Vietnam. Even to this day, there are people who thought the military was not given a fair chance to win that war. And let's talk about how that war ended in the next slide. Peace talks between what eventually would become the Nixon administration and the North Vietnamese, went on and on and on, with the North increasingly encroaching into the South. Nixon began the longest and largest bombing campaign of the war. It even went into Cambodia. Next slide. Finally, in January of 1973, I remembered well, I was 6 years old, the United States, North Vietnam, South Vietnam, and the Viet Cong agreed to the following conditions. The U.S. will withdraw all troops out of Vietnam in 60 days. All prisoners of war on both sides would be released. All military activity in and around Laos and Cambodia would be ended. And the North and South Vietnam would be divided by the same border as was at the beginning of the war. A lot of people in America said this is the exact same kind of junk that happened in Korea. We fought a war for nothing. All right, I have two more slides to do on the third bit, and this is the last lecture, so calm down.